Ambassador Lucas Harper stared at the floating spoon in his ceremonial soup and wondered, not for the first time, whether diplomatic immunity covered accidental violations of physics. The utensil hovered above the luminescent broth with the kind of casual defiance of gravity that made his earth-trained brain itch, while around him, the crystalline hall of the Velthari court pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that seemed to respond to every word spoken. "Sir, please remember that commenting on the food's appearance can be interpreted as romantic interest in the cooking staff," whispered Dr. Elena Vasquez, his cultural attaché, from behind her frantically flickering data pad. "Also, that spoon is psychically linked to your emotional state, so try not to think about how much this terrifies you." "Too late," Lucas muttered, watching the spoon begin to vibrate in what appeared to be sympathetic anxiety. Around the vast hall, hundreds of Velthari nobles observed the human delegation with the polite interest of beings whose elongated ears could apparently detect emotional resonance from across the room. Queen Lyrale sat at the head of the crystalline table, her presence both commanding and somehow isolated despite being surrounded by her court. Her ears, more elegant and pronounced than those of her subjects, were adorned with neural jewelry that floated in slow orbits around the delicate points, pulsing with soft light that seemed to echo the rhythm of her thoughts. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that made the hall's living crystal walls shimmer in response. "Ambassador Harper, we hope the ceremonial feast meets with your approval," she said, her eyes, a shifting color somewhere between silver and deep blue, fixed on his with what he assumed was diplomatic curiosity. "Your species' dietary requirements were carefully researched to ensure compatibility with our traditional welcoming rituals." Lucas glanced at his plate, where what appeared to be crystallized starlight arranged itself into aesthetically pleasing patterns, while somehow maintaining the consistency of perfectly prepared meat. "Your Majesty, this is remarkable. I've never seen cuisine that rearranges itself for optimal presentation." A subtle shift in the bioluminescent patterns around him suggested this comment had been well received, though Dr. Vasquez made a small sound that might have been relief or impending panic. "The food responds to the emotional resonance of those consuming it," Queen Lyrale explained, her ears tilting forward in what Lucas was learning indicated interest. "It becomes most pleasing to those who approach it with genuine appreciation rather than mere politeness. In that case, Your Majesty, this is absolutely the most fascinating meal I've ever encountered. On Earth, our food generally stays where we put it and maintains whatever shape the chef intended." The Queen's expression shifted to something that looked like genuine curiosity. "How limiting. Does this not make dining a rather static experience?" "We make up for it with conversation," Lucas replied, surprised to find himself relaxing despite the floating cutlery and the fact that his napkin appeared to be gently cleaning itself. "Though I admit, having dinner that actively tries to please you has its advantages." Dr. Vasquez cleared her throat softly. "Sir, perhaps we should discuss the trade agreements." "Dr. Vasquez," Queen Lyrale interrupted gently, her attention never leaving Lucas. "Surely business can wait until after we have properly welcomed our guests. Tell me, Ambassador, what are human customs regarding ceremonial meals? Do you also share food as a symbol of trust and connection?" Lucas considered this while his spoon finally settled into his soup, which immediately adjusted its temperature to exactly what he would have preferred. "We do, actually. Sharing a meal is one of our oldest friendship rituals. Breaking bread together, we call it, though I suppose in this case it would be more like sharing levitating soup." The Queen's laugh was like silver chimes harmonizing with crystal, and the hall's walls responded with a cascade of warm, golden light. "I find your species' approach to social bonding fascinating. You form connections through choice, rather than biological imperative." "Mostly, yes. We believe relationships should be voluntary." Lucas paused, struck by something wistful in her tone. "Is that not the case with your people?" The Velthari form bonds through necessity, tradition, and the requirements of our neural networks. Choice is a luxury few of us experience. Her ears drooped slightly, a gesture so subtle Lucas almost missed it. Tell me about human marriage customs. Dr. Vasquez's cultural briefings suggested they involve voluntary commitment between individuals. Dr. Vasquez nearly dropped her data pad. Your Majesty, perhaps we should focus on the trade negotiations. It's all right, Alina, Lucas said, intrigued by the Queen's obvious fascination with human relationship dynamics. Your Majesty, human marriage is indeed based on choice. Two people decide they want to share their lives, make a public commitment, and hopefully live happily together. They simply decide, without biological compatibility tests or neural network integration requirements. Sometimes they don't even check if they like the same movies, Lucas said with a grin, then noticed the Queen's confused expression. Entertainment media. The point is, we sometimes make the decision based on nothing more than emotional connection and mutual attraction. Queen Lyralei's neural jewelry pulsed with increased intensity, and her ears rotated forward with sharp attention. And this commitment is binding. Legally and emotionally, yes, though humans can choose to end marriages if they become incompatible. We call it divorce. Remarkable, the Queen murmured, her gaze intensifying in a way that made Lucas suddenly aware that he might be venturing into territory his diplomatic training hadn't covered. So a human could propose marriage to someone they found appealing, and if accepted, they would be bound by choice alone. That's essentially how it works, yes. Lucas glanced at Dr. Vasquez, who was now pale enough to blend in with the crystalline furniture, though typically there's more ceremony involved than a dinner conversation. Queen Lyralei leaned forward slightly, her expression carrying an intensity that made the hall's bioluminescent patterns shift to deeper, more complex configurations. And if someone were to suggest, hypothetically, that sharing a ceremonial meal in the presence of witnesses constituted such a proposal, Lucas laughed, completely missing the way every Velthari ear in the hall had swiveled toward their conversation. Your Majesty, if ceremonial dinners counted as marriage proposals, diplomats would never be able to attend state functions. Can you imagine? One shared meal, and suddenly every trade negotiation becomes a wedding ceremony. He gestured at their elaborate table setting with its floating utensils and responsive cuisine. I mean, by that logic, this dinner would make us married, and I'm pretty sure my government would have some concerns about that level of diplomatic commitment. The words hung in the air like a physical presence, and Lucas became aware that the hall had fallen into absolute silence. Every bioluminescent pattern in the vast space had frozen mid-pulse, hundreds of elongated ears had gone perfectly still, and Queen Lyralei's expression had transformed into something he couldn't interpret but definitely didn't like. I guess this makes us married, he added with a weak laugh, trying to break the tension that had suddenly become thick enough to cut with his psychically sensitive dinner knife. Queen Lyralei's ears flushed a deep sapphire blue from base to tip. Her neural jewelry began spinning in rapid, complex patterns, and her voice, when she finally spoke, carried harmonics that made every crystal surface in the hall ring like a bell. Ambassador Lucas Harper, she said, her words seeming to resonate through the very structure of the building. Do you understand what you have just said? Lucas looked around the hall, taking in the expressions of shock, joy, and what might have been congratulations on the faces of the Velthari court, then at Dr. Vasquez, whose face had progressed beyond pale into territory that suggested she might actually faint. I'm beginning to suspect, he said slowly, that I may have just made a very significant cultural error. The Queen rose from her seat with fluid grace, her presence somehow filling the vast space as biomechanical altars began emerging from the floor and ceremonial music started playing from sources Lucas couldn't identify. Error, Queen Lyralei said, her voice carrying new harmonics that seemed to vibrate through his bones. My dear ambassador, You have just given me the most precious gift in the galaxy. As the implications of his words began to dawn on him, Lucas realized that his biggest diplomatic challenge was no longer negotiating trade agreements. It was figuring out how to explain to his superiors that he had accidentally married an alien queen with what he thought was a harmless dinner joke. The ceremonial transformation of the dining hall happened so quickly that Lucas barely had time to process what was occurring before he found himself standing in the center of what appeared to be a wedding ceremony, designed by someone with access to technology that treated physics as merely a suggestion. Crystalline arches grew from the floor in spiraling helixes, holographic flowers bloomed in impossible colors, and the air itself began to shimmer with harmonics that made his teeth ache in a not entirely unpleasant way. "Elena," he whispered to Dr. Vasquez, who was clutching her data pad like a life preserver, "please tell me there's a cultural protocol for backing out of accidental alien marriages." "Sir," she replied in a voice that suggested she was hanging onto sanity by her fingernails. "I'm reading through every xenological database we have, and the closest thing I can find to a relevant precedent is a footnote about a trade negotiator who accidentally adopted an entire Rigelian family. But that was resolved through paperwork and didn't involve bioneural bonding ceremonies." "Bioneural what now?" Before Dr. Vasquez could respond, Queen Lyreley glided toward him with a smile that transformed her entire face from regal authority to something that looked disturbingly like joy. Her neural jewelry had shifted into configurations he hadn't seen before, creating patterns of light that seemed to pulse in rhythm with his increasingly frantic heartbeat. "Lucas," she said, and hearing his name in her harmonically enhanced voice made something in his chest flutter in a way that definitely wasn't helping his diplomatic composure. "I must thank you for choosing such a beautifully traditional approach to your proposal." "Your Majesty, I think there may have been a misunderstanding. The sharing of ceremonial food in the presence of the court, followed by your declaration of binding intent, was performed exactly as prescribed in our most ancient texts." Her ears had positioned themselves in configurations that Dr. Vasquez was frantically trying to decode on her cultural database. "Many of our people wait centuries for such a moment, and you accomplished it with such elegant spontaneity." Lucas looked around the hall, where Velthari nobles were now wearing what appeared to be ceremonial robes that had somehow materialized from wall alcoves he was certain hadn't existed 5 minutes ago. "Your Majesty, what I said was meant as a joke, a humorous observation about the absurdity of ceremonial meals constituting marriage proposals." Queen Lyreley's expression shifted to something that looked like patient amusement mixed with tender concern. "My dear Lucas, humor is often how the heart speaks truths that the mind is too cautious to voice directly. Your joke revealed your subconscious desire to bond with me, and I am deeply honored by the courage it took to make such a declaration." "But I didn't mean—" "Of course you didn't consciously intend it," she interrupted gently, reaching toward him with hands that seemed to glow with their own soft light. "The most profound connections often form before our rational minds can interfere with their natural development." Dr. Vasquez stepped forward with the desperate courage of someone whose career was about to become a historical footnote. "Your Majesty, perhaps there could be a grace period, a cooling-off time to ensure both parties fully understand the implications." Queen Lyreley's ears rotated toward the cultural attaché, with what Lucas was beginning to recognize as polite condescension. "Dr. Vasquez, Velthari bonding ceremonies cannot be postponed once initiated. The bioneural networks have already begun integration protocols based on Ambassador Harper's formal declaration. To stop now would cause psychological damage to both parties." "What kind of psychological damage?" Lucas asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. "The emotional resonance created by your proposal has already begun forming neural pathways between us. Severing these connections abruptly would result in what your species might recognize as severe depression, coupled with a permanent sense of incompleteness. Her expression grew tender in a way that made Lucas's stomach flip. Neither of us would ever be able to form meaningful emotional connections with anyone else. Lucas stared at her, feeling the weight of unintended consequences settling around him like a trap made of good intentions and cultural misunderstanding. So if I don't go through with this ceremony, we'll both be emotionally damaged for life. Not damaged, Queen Lyrale corrected, her voice carrying new harmonics that seemed to resonate directly through his nervous system. Simply incomplete, forever aware that we abandon the most profound connection either of us will ever have the opportunity to experience. Around them, the ceremony continued its inexorable progression. Biomechanical altars had begun producing crystalline rings that appeared to be growing themselves from pure light, while harmonic frequencies filled the air with music that seemed designed to synchronize heartbeats and breathing patterns. Lucas realized with growing horror that he was being gently, but inescapably guided through a marriage ceremony to someone he'd met less than 6 hours ago. "Your Majesty," he tried again, "in human culture, marriage requires mutual consent and understanding. I don't know anything about Vilthari marriage customs, your personal preferences, or what my role would be as your husband." Queen Lyrale's smile became radiant, and her neural jewelry began spinning in patterns that created aurora-like effects in the air around her. "Your role will be to be cherished, protected, and valued above all other possessions in my realm. As my bonded consort, you will want for nothing, need nothing that I cannot provide, and never again experience the loneliness of individual existence." Possessions, Lucas echoed, catching on a word that made his diplomatic instincts start screaming warnings. "In Vilthari culture, those we love become our most treasured possessions," she explained with the patience of someone educating a beloved but culturally ignorant child. "To possess someone completely is the highest form of care we can offer. You will belong to me as I will belong to you, though as queen, my belonging extends to my people, while yours will be focused entirely on me." Dr. Vasquez made a sound that was part gasp and part whimper. Lucas felt the ground shift beneath his feet as he realized the full implications of what he had stumbled into. "You're saying that in your culture, love and ownership are the same thing." "Not the same," Queen Lyrale corrected, moving closer until he could feel the warmth radiating from her bioenhanced metabolism. "Ownership is how love is expressed. To love someone without possessing them completely would be cruel, leaving them vulnerable, unprotected, free to make choices that might harm them." The crystalline rings had reached completion and now hovered between them, pulsing with their own internal light. Queen Lyrale reached for one, her movements graceful and certain, while Lucas stood frozen with the realization that he was about to become the property of an alien queen who genuinely believed that possessive control was the purest form of affection. "Lucas," she said softly, her voice carrying undertones that seemed to bypass his rational mind and speak directly to some deeper part of his consciousness. "Accept this bond, and you will never again face the universe alone. You will be cherished, protected, and loved with an intensity your species rarely experiences." As she slipped the ring of crystallized light onto his finger, Lucas felt something fundamental shift in his consciousness, a warmth that spread through his nervous system, carrying with it an awareness of Queen Lyrale's presence that was far more intimate than anything he had ever experienced. "Now you are mine," she whispered, her words seeming to resonate through the new neural pathways forming between them. "And I am yours, though you may find that your definition of belonging will need to expand to match the reality of Vilthari love." Lucas looked down at the ring that had somehow integrated itself with his skin, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat, and realized that his biggest problem was no longer explaining this situation to his superiors. It was figuring out how to maintain his humanity while bonded to someone who loved him enough to own him completely. Lucas woke to the sensation of being gently monitored by technology. He couldn't see, but could definitely feel. Like having a concerned mother maid of warm electricity checking his vital signs while he slept. His quarters, he could no longer think of them as a guest room, had adapted overnight to his biological needs with an accuracy that was both thoughtful and deeply unsettling. The temperature, humidity, lighting, and even the firmness of his bed had been adjusted to optimize his rest, though no one had asked his preferences. "Good morning, beloved," came Queen Lyraleigh's voice through the neural link that had formed during their bonding ceremony, her mental presence carrying warmth and satisfaction that made his chest tighten with emotions that weren't entirely his own. "I trust you slept well. Your biorhythms suggested some restlessness, so I had the environmental systems make minor adjustments throughout the night." Lucas sat up slowly, acutely aware that his wife, the word still felt surreal, had been monitoring his sleep patterns and adjusting his environment without his knowledge or consent. Through the neural bond, he could feel her genuine concern for his comfort, but that somehow made it worse rather than better. "Lyraleigh," he said aloud, then winced as speaking her name triggered a pulse of pleasure through their connection that felt entirely too intimate for someone he barely knew. "I appreciate the concern, but I prefer to control my own environment." The response came as a combination of vocal reply and direct neural communication, creating a strange stereo effect that made him feel slightly dizzy. "My dear Lucas, your preferences are still developing as you adjust to our bond. Until you understand what is truly best for your well-being, I will ensure your needs are met according to Velthari standards of care." Before he could respond, his door dissolved into light to admit Dr. Vasquez, who looked like she hadn't slept at all. She was flanked by two Velthari guards whose presence seemed more ceremonial than threatening, but their elongated ears tracked her movements with predatory precision. "Sir," she said, her voice carefully neutral, "I've been in communication with Earth Command. They want a full report on the situation." "What did you tell them?" "That you've successfully negotiated an unprecedented cultural exchange program," she replied with the kind of diplomatic creativity that had probably saved both their careers. "They're treating this as either a hostage situation or the most effective diplomatic coup in human history, depending on which committee is asking." Through the neural link, Lucas felt Queen Lyraleigh's amusement at what she clearly perceived as primitive human concern over a natural biological process. Her mental voice carried undertones of possessive satisfaction as she observed his interaction with Dr. Vasquez. "Elena, I need you to research Velthari law regarding marriage dissolution or annulment," Lucas said quietly, then immediately regretted it as he felt a spike of distress through the neural bond that made his stomach clench with sympathetic pain. "Lucas," Queen Lyraleigh's voice came from seemingly everywhere at once, "such research would be both futile and harmful to your adjustment process. Velthari bonds cannot be dissolved without severe psychological consequences. As I explained during Your Majesty, with respect, I think I'm still the best judge of my own needs." Queen Lyraleigh's ears tilted forward in an expression he was learning, meant patient correction of a beloved but misguided concept. "My dear husband, your needs extend far beyond what your individual consciousness can perceive. Through our bond, I can monitor your stress levels, nutritional requirements, sleep quality, and emotional balance with precision no individual assessment could match." "That's exactly what concerns me," Lucas replied, then felt the neural bond transmit his anxiety directly to her consciousness, creating a feedback loop that made him feel like he was arguing with himself. "You're experiencing adjustment anxiety," she diagnosed with the confidence of someone who had access to his neurochemistry in real time. "This is normal for beings transitioning from individual to bonded existence. I've scheduled sessions with our finest bioneural specialists to help you adapt more comfortably." Dr. Vasquez shifted nervously. "Your Majesty, Perhaps Ambassador Harper could benefit from maintaining some connections to human cultural patterns during this adjustment period. Queen Lyralay's attention turned to the cultural attaché with the kind of focus that made flowers wilt and small animals seek shelter. Dr. Vasquez, your concern is noted, but Lucas's adjustment will proceed more smoothly without conflicting cultural influences. He needs to learn Velthari patterns of thought and feeling without the confusion of outdated human concepts of individual autonomy. Lucas felt a chill that had nothing to do with the room's environmental controls. Outdated concepts. Individual decision-making is a survival mechanism that becomes unnecessary once proper bonding occurs. Queen Lyralay explained with the patience of someone educating a child about why they couldn't eat candy for breakfast. Your human need for control and independence will naturally diminish as you discover the superior comfort of shared consciousness and guided choices. Through the neural link, Lucas could feel her genuine love and concern for his well-being, but it was the kind of love someone might feel for a treasured pet, protective, possessive, and completely unconcerned with the pet's own opinions about its care. What if I don't want my need for independence to diminish? Queen Lyralay moved closer, her presence triggering another wave of environmental adjustment that made the room feel more like a nest than a living space. My beloved Lucas, what you think you want and what will actually make you happy are often very different things. Through our bond, I can sense your deepest needs more clearly than your conscious mind can. She reached toward him, her touch sending waves of biochemical contentment through the neural connection that made it difficult to maintain his sense of alarm. You think you want independence, but what you actually crave is the security of belonging completely to someone who will never let you face danger or uncertainty alone. Lucas felt his rational objections struggling against the artificial calm her touch generated, like trying to stay angry while being gently drugged with happiness. Lyralay, I need to maintain some sense of individual identity. You will, she assured him, her mental voice carrying absolute conviction. You will be Lucas Harper, beloved consort of Queen Lyralay, cherished above all other treasures in the realm. Your identity will be more complete and secure than it has ever been. As she spoke, Lucas realized that she genuinely believed she was offering him something precious and beautiful, a life free from the burden of independent choice, surrounded by perfect care and absolute love. The fact that it sounded like a beautiful prison to him was, from her perspective, simply evidence that he didn't yet understand how wonderful his new existence would be. Through the neural bond, he felt her satisfaction at his gradual acceptance of her presence, unaware that his decreased resistance was due more to the biochemical effects of their connection than any genuine change in his feelings about autonomy. Now, Queen Lyralay said with the bright cheerfulness of someone who had just solved an important problem, let's discuss your new daily schedule. I've arranged for cultural orientation sessions, bio-neural harmonization treatments, and several social events where you can meet other bonded consorts who can share their experiences adjusting to Velthari partnership patterns. Lucas looked at Dr. Vasquez, who was staring at her data pad with the expression of someone watching a disaster unfold in slow motion, and realized that his biggest challenge wasn't going to be escaping his marriage. It was going to be figuring out how to remain himself while bonded to someone who loved him too much to let him make his own choices. 3 months into his marriage, Lucas had learned that revolution could be as subtle as a shared emotion at precisely the right moment. He stood in the royal gardens, watching Queen Lyralay tend to bioluminescent flowers that responded to her touch with cascades of color, and carefully projected feelings of contentment through their neural bond. Not the artificial calm her presence induced, but genuine happiness at seeing her joy in something she chose to do rather than something she felt obligated to monitor. The change in her was subtle but unmistakable. Her ears had relaxed from their usual vigilant positioning, Her movements had lost the constant undercurrent of watchful protection, and for the first time since their bonding, she seemed to be existing in the moment rather than anticipating his needs. "These are beautiful," Lucas said aloud, genuinely admiring the way the flowers seemed to dance in response to her bioneural field. "On Earth, we have to settle for plants that only change with the seasons." "You sound less resistant today," Queen Lyreley observed, her mental voice carrying curiosity rather than her usual concern about his adjustment progress. "Your emotional resonance has been different this past week." Lucas had spent those weeks learning to navigate their connection like a delicate instrument, discovering that the neural bond wasn't just a one-way monitoring system, but a genuine pathway for mutual influence. If he could feel her emotions affecting his choices, then she was equally susceptible to his feelings shaping her behavior. She just didn't recognize it as external influence because she experienced his emotions as part of her own expanded consciousness. "I've been thinking about something you said during our bonding ceremony," he replied, moving closer to examine the flowers while carefully maintaining the emotional resonance he'd learned to project. "About belonging to each other, not just me belonging to you." Her ears rotated toward him with sharp attention, and through their bond he felt her surprise at the direction of his thoughts. "Yes. I've been wondering what it means for you to belong to me, when you're also a queen with responsibilities to your entire people." Lucas touched one of the flowers, smiling as it pulsed with warm light in response. "It seems like your belonging is divided while mine is exclusive." Queen Lyreley's hand stilled among the flowers, and Lucas felt confusion ripple through their connection, not distress, but genuine puzzlement at a concept she'd never been asked to examine. My belonging to you exists within my broader responsibilities," she said slowly. "You are my most cherished possession, but my people require." "What if," Lucas interrupted gently, projecting calm curiosity rather than challenge, "we thought about it differently? What if belonging wasn't about possession but about priority?" Through their bond, he could feel her mind working through implications she'd never considered, and he carefully maintained emotional support while she processed ideas that challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of love and commitment. "Priority," she repeated. "When you make decisions about my schedule, my environment, my social interactions, do you ask what I would choose, or do you decide what you think is best for me?" Lucas sat on the crystal bench beside the garden and felt her unconscious adjustment to optimize his comfort. "Right now, you just modified the bench's temperature because you sensed I was slightly cold. But you didn't ask if I wanted to be warmer." Queen Lyreley's neural jewelry flickered with rapid processing patterns. "Asking seems inefficient when I can sense your needs directly. But sensing my physical comfort isn't the same as understanding my emotional needs," Lucas replied, carefully projecting love and appreciation along with his words. "When you make choices for me without asking, it tells me that my opinions matter less than your assessment of what's good for me." The emotional impact of this realization hit their neural bond like a wave, and Lucas felt her shock at recognizing how her care had been experienced as dismissal of his personhood. "I never intended," she began, her voice carrying harmonics of distress that made the flowers around them dim with sympathetic response. "I know," Lucas said quickly, flooding their connection with reassurance and affection. "That's what I mean about belonging to each other. Your intentions matter to me because I love you, and my feelings matter to you because you love me. But love that doesn't include respect for the other person's choices isn't really love. It's just very sophisticated caretaking." Over the following weeks, their relationship began a subtle transformation that rippled through both their daily interactions and the broader patterns of Velthari court life. Queen Lyreley began asking Lucas about his preferences before adjusting his environment, and discovered that his happiness increased significantly when he felt his choices were valued even in small matters. More significantly, Lucas learned to use their neural connection to share human concepts of partnership and mutual respect, not through argument or resistance, but through the patient demonstration of how trust could enhance rather than threaten the bonds between them. The other bonded consorts are asking questions. Queen Lyrale mentioned one evening as they shared a meal that had been prepared according to his preferences rather than optimal nutrition calculations. They've noticed that our bond displays different harmonic patterns than traditional Vilthari marriages. Different how? More reciprocal. Usually, the neural patterns show clear dominant structures, but ours appears to flow in both directions equally. Her ears tilted in the expression he'd learned meant fascination mixed with mild concern. Some of the court bioneural specialists are concerned that this might represent incomplete bonding. Lucas felt his way carefully through the emotional landscape of their connection, sending calm assurance while gauging her receptivity to a more direct conversation about their relationship's evolution. "What do you think?" he asked. "Do you feel like our bond is incomplete?" Queen Lyrale was quiet for a long moment, her consciousness intertwining with his as she examined their connection from the inside. "No," she said finally. "If anything, it feels more complete than I expected. When I make decisions by considering your preferences alongside my protective instincts, the outcomes seem to create more genuine happiness for both of us." "That's because partnership creates better outcomes than control," Lucas replied, then immediately projected love and appreciation to soften any challenge she might perceive in his words. "Not because your protective instincts are wrong, but because they work better when they're informed by my actual needs rather than your assumptions about what I need." The transformation accelerated as other bonded pairs in the court began experimenting with the patterns they observed in Lucas and Queen Lyrale's relationship. Within 6 months, Vilthari bonding customs had begun incorporating concepts of mutual consultation and respected autonomy, creating stronger rather than more fragile partnerships. A year after his accidental proposal, Lucas stood once again in the crystal hall where their marriage had begun, but this time as an honored guest at the bonding ceremony of 2 Vilthari who had specifically requested to use the Harper-Lyrale protocol, a marriage format that balanced protective care with respected choice. "Any regrets?" Queen Lyrale asked through their neural link, her consciousness intertwining with his in patterns that had become as natural as breathing. Lucas considered the question seriously. He was permanently bonded to an alien queen, unable to return to purely human existence, and committed to a life that would always require careful navigation of 2 different concepts of love and autonomy. "About the marriage?" "No," he replied, both aloud and through their connection. "About the way we got here, definitely. Next time I want to marry someone, I'm going to make sure I mean to propose first." Queen Lyrale's laugh rippled through both their neural bond and the crystal hall's acoustic systems, creating harmonics that made the assembled wedding guests look around